holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe. Your holy presence living in me. This is my daily bread. This is my daily bread. Your very word spoken to me, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you, and I'm desperate for you, and I'm lost without you. I'm lost without you. I'm lost without you. I'm lost without you. This is the air I breathe. This is the air I breathe.
So here we are. It's Easter Saturday, coming at the end of this really eventful week. It's the Jewish Sabbath day, the day of complete rest, a day of waiting, a day of reflection. It's been such a traumatic week, ending with the shocking events of yesterday. And there must have been an overwhelming sense of shock, of grief, of loss among the disciples and the followers of Christ, as their beloved Jesus was so cruelly put to death. Can you imagine how they must have felt? They would have been quietly gathering in rooms, talking about what had happened, fearful for their own lives, praying, wondering what was to come. The promises made by Jesus yet to be fulfilled, and then wondering how this was all going to be. So much uncertainty, so much anxiety. They were just trying to hold on to everything that they knew was true and dear. Then we had the women, Mary Magdalene and the others, also grieving for the loss of Jesus. They had stood at the feet of the cross watching him die, not leaving him at all, and then returning back and immediately gathering spices and oils all ready to anoint the body. They couldn't carry it out on the Saturday as it was the Sabbath day, so they would have to wait and wait for the next day. They didn't think for one moment that body would not be in the tomb. Then we also have the guards. They'd been posted at the tomb that day. There was fear that trouble might arise, that perhaps the followers of Christ would steal the body and cause further trouble. So these guards were posted at the tomb, and they would have been sitting and watching and waiting. Different fears, different anxieties, but still waiting, as all these people were on that day. A day of mixed emotions, of grief, of fear, of expectation of what was to come. To some that day it must have seemed as if the light had gone out of their lives. How were they to know that the next day the lights would be turned on, burning so brightly? Jesus was to rise from the dead. What rejoicing was to come? But not today. Today it was gloomy, it was dark, lamps would have been lit. And let's think about how that must have felt. And we're going to light a candle just to try to capture that moment, to lighten up the gloom of that day. And if you have a candle, please light it too at the same time. And as I lit this candle, it reminded me of a verse from the past. And I could imagine Jesus saying this to his followers. And it goes, "Take this candle and light it. And as long as it burns, think of me. But when it has burnt down, there is no need to feel lost or afraid, for my light will be with you always." I really love that verse. This week, leading up to Easter, is a journey. I like to think of us all travelling along the road. For some of us, it's been quite bumpy, and for others, smooth. But on this particular day, this Saturday, we are weary from the week's journey, and the feeling of, gosh, are we ever going to get there? We see a lay-by, and we pull in, glad to rest our eyes, glad to rest our bodies. We're tired, we're weary. Just try to gather a little bit of energy to help continue us on. It's been a long and eventful week's journey. The next morning we can set off again, still weary, but as we go round that corner, round that bend, there it is, this wonderful resting stop, like an oasis in the desert. And in we can pull. It's full of light. We can take lots of refreshments. We're totally refreshed and replenished. And we can set off down that road of life again, totally revitalised and full of joy. All our lives are long roads. We have youngsters skipping along, carefree, and others have heavy loads. There are bumps on the road to try and avoid, and wrong turnings to take. Some people are alone, and others have folks alongside them. As I reflect today, I think of my own road, and I realise how blessed I was to be set off along a road with wonderful seeds sown inside me. I had a wonderful grandmother. Her name was Ethel Fidget. She was short, she was stout, she was quite strong, quietly strong. And she lived in an upstairs terrace house in a street in Bermondsey in South London with my granddad, Ern. All the houses were very close together. It was a really close, tight-knit community. They worked really hard. Granddad in a paper factory, and Nan worked as a supervisor at Peak Freen's biscuit factory. They had very little, but they had jobs. Many in the street had no employment. There was no state aid, there was no national health, but there was a lot of poverty. And my grandmother would make pots of broth and pots of stew and dish these out to those who had no food. She loved us four granddaughters, of which I was one, and she'd spoil us with delicious cakes and plates of broken biscuits from Peak Freen's when we go to see her. This was a real treat for us. We saw them often. They would catch 2 buses down to visit us, and I would wait at the end of the road, patiently, till we saw those red double-decker buses come round that corner, little short fidget Nan on one side and big tall fidget Grandad on the other side of the platform. She was loving, she was caring, and she was sharing. She passed these qualities on to my mother, who passed it on to us 4 children, and I have tried in my own way to pass it on to my own children and now my grandchildren. I adored my grandmother, and I regard her as being somebody who was so instrumental in my life and setting the values that I still hold very dear to me now. That matriarchal line can be very powerful in the lives of our children. So there I was, at a very early age, being shown to love your neighbour. This fundamental thing that Jesus tells us to do, love one another. Through my life, I've tried to put this into practice in one way or another, and sometimes I've achieved it better than others. Those seeds sown by Ethel Fidget just grew and grew over the years. And you know, if you didn't have Fidget Nan in your life, you can still sow those seeds for yourself. Doesn't matter how old you are, and into others as well. And you can watch those seeds of caring and loving grow. But that road hasn't always been smooth. I took a really wrong turn and went badly off track. Looking back, it's not a time that I'm at all proud of. But gently and slowly, God brought me back onto the road. I went to an Alpha course with a friend of mine, Jenny, in Tunbridge Wells. I had absolutely no idea what it was about, but I said I would go with her. I was blown away by this course. Open discussions, beautiful meals shared with different, interesting people. And during that time, I approached a crossroad and decided to go down the road that allowed Jesus into my life. I opened the door and I invited him in. And that road just opened up in front of me. It's a beautiful, joyful journey, and it's just getting better and better. I asked for forgiveness for what I'd done in the past, and it was like a weight off my shoulders, one that I had been carrying for such a long time. So today it's a quiet, reflective day. A day when the disciples were reeling from the shock of what had happened, waiting patiently, reflecting on our lives. Some of us are grieving for lost ones. Some are facing so much uncertainty. We've certainly had a year of that. My own past couple of weeks have been full of anxiety when my husband had to go into hospital for an operation. That day of waiting for news was so hard and so difficult. I put my trust in God and in prayer. But oh, the frailty of us human beings. That little chink of fear crept in. Was it going to be bad news? Was everything going to be all right? And you know, I'm sure the disciples on that Saturday, those followers of Christ that felt so strong and sure about their faith, must have also felt a little bit of this that day. They weren't sure what was going to happen. They would have prayed together and kept each other going, remembering the words of Jesus, trusting in his words. We've lit this candle to lift some of the darkness and just remind ourselves that Jesus is always there with us. His light and his love never, ever burns out. And tomorrow there's that wonderful day waiting for us. His love will shine through our darkness. Jesus showed us in his death and resurrection that he died for us so that we could be forgiven, so that we could live. There is no greater love than this. I'd like to finish with just a prayer, and it's one we've used so regularly over the last 12 months. And it goes, "My Lord God, I have no idea of where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end. And the fact that I am following your will does not mean that I'm actually doing so. But I believe the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have that desire in all I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. And I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may not realize it. Therefore, will I trust you always. Though I may seem to be lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. Amen. So today on this Easter Saturday, sit quietly, sit patiently for a while, reflect on your own lives. For tomorrow there is this amazing day waiting. This day of affirmation that if we trust and hold Jesus in our lives, then this road that we're travelling along will have joy, will have light, will have love, and will have hope. Thank you.
The mountains move, come with expectation, waiting here for you. Waiting here for you. You're the Lord of all creation, still you know my heart. Me from the start, waiting here for you, with our hands lifted high in praise, and it's you we adore. Waiting here for you with our hands lifted high in praise, and it's you we adore.